So apparently, I've been accused of attacking a phantom Pan-Africanist. According to this faceless YouTuber, I'm critiquing a imaginary version of Pan-Africanism that doesn't actually exist, especially when I say it flattens unique black histories and builds its identity in opposition to whiteness.
Just for now, just for now, just for now.
Alright, so we gonna do this properly then. What I'm gonna show in this video is simple. I'm not attacking a phantom, I'm describing the necessary consequences of the actual ideology laid down by foundational Pan-Africanist thinkers themselves. If you take their own stated goals seriously, you get exactly what I'm criticizing. The flattening of local black histories into one racial abstraction and an identity defined by permanent opposition to a hostile white world. And if you don't like that conclusion, take it up with the sources, not me. Now, this guy's basic claim is that I'm inventing some phantom Pan-Africanist who erases local black histories, ignores the unique status of black Americans, frames black identity purely in reaction to white supremacy. He act like I'm strawmanning the movement, like I'm arguing against some caricature instead of real positions. So let me spell it out in slow motion using the movement's own internal logic. Now let's get into my first point. Pan-Africanism from the ground up is about unifying the Negroes of the world into a single political destiny centered on a redeemed Africa. Not let us stabilize and honor the distinct histories of each black community. Not let us preserve the concrete civic identities of people where they actually live. Nah, the stated mission is organize the global black population on the basis of a shared racial origin toward a single future project, a more powerful African nation. Alright, so what we have here is the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, edited by his wife, Amy Jacques Garvey, from the Journal of Pan-African Studies. So his wife compiled his speeches, his letters, etc., all of his archived work, and published it in the Journal of Pan-African Studies. In 2009 is when this specific edition came out. So that's what we're looking at. So here you can see the first thing the first thing I have highlighted is let Africa be our guiding star, our star of destiny. How dare anyone tell us that Africa cannot be redeemed when we have 400 million men and women with warm blood coursing through their veins? The power that holds Africa is not divine. The power that holds Africa is human, and it is recognized that whatsoever man has done, man can do. So he's calling for 400 million men of African and women of African descent to redeem Africa. And we also see here on page 41, Africa for the Africans. For 5 years, the Universal Negro Improvement Association has been advocating the cause of Africa for the Africans. That is, that the Negro peoples of the world should concentrate upon the object of building up for themselves a great nation in Africa. But it ain't just Garvey though. In fact, one of his influences, Alex Cromwell, also proves my point as well. So for y'all that don't know, I'm gonna just pull up the Wikipedia page. I got it pulled up already. So this is Alexander Cromwell. And it says here that he spent time in Liberia. He returned to the United States. I think his parents were from Sierra Leone or something like that, it said. But more importantly, it says here that he was an important voice within the abolition movement, which is good. We appreciate that. And a leader of the Pan-African ideology. Okay? Cromwell's legacy can be seen not only by his personal achievements, such as his help founding the American Negro Academy, we like that, but also in the influence he exerted on other black nationalists and Pan-Africanists such as Marcus Garvey. So Marcus Garvey is credited as the one that made Pan-Africanism famous, the Caribbean man Marcus Garvey, but actually Alexander Cromwell was already on this type of time, and in fact he actually influenced Marcus Garvey. Now Alex Cromwell wrote a book. Well, it's more like a compilation of his work, but it's called The Future of Africa. And as you can see, it's written by Alexander Cromwell. All right, so this is Pan-Africanism, even more foundational than Marcus Garvey. This is who influenced Marcus Garvey. He says, Africa lies low and is wretched. She is the maimed and crippled arm of humanity. Her great powers are wasted. Dislocation and anguish have reached every joint. Her condition in every point calls for succor. Moral, social, domestic, political, commercial, and intellectual. Here arises the call of duty and obligation to colored men. So Alex Cromell, who is more foundational than Marcus Garvey, on pages 219 through 220 in a section called The Relations and Duties of Free Colored Men in America to Africa, is saying that we have a obligation and a duty as colored men to help Africa. So Cromell is saying that we as Black Americans are necessarily obligated to help Africa. And to contextualize what this movement actually is, what I have here on screen is a handout, is a flyer for a Pan-African conference in 1900. It says, this conference is organized by a committee of the African Association for the discussion of the native races question and will be attended and addressed by those of African descent from all parts of the British Empire, the United States of America, Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti, etc. You are cordially and earnestly invited to attend. And why is this important? We see that the Pan-African movement as early as 1900 is trying to unify all of these distinct groups of people to fight on behalf of Africa. And this ain't a one-off. Let's go back to Garvey, page 44. It says, this is Garvey out of his own mouth. Everybody knows that there is absolutely no difference between the Native African and the American and the West Indian Negroes, and that we are descendants from one common family stock. That's what he said, bruh. I didn't say it. He said it. Everybody knows that there is absolutely no difference between the Native African and the American and the West Indian Negroes, in that we are all descendants from one common family stock.
But wait, there's more.
So Cromell agrees with this. He says, I may add here that I address the free colored men of America because I am identified with them, and not because I feel that they, especially and above all the other sons of Africa in distant lands, are called upon for zeal and interest in her behalf. It is the exaggeration of the relation of American black men to Africa which has turned the hearts of many of her own children away from her. So, off the bat, he's acknowledging that there is an exaggeration that takes place. He's trying to say that, yeah, I understand that y'all home is what it is, but y'all still got help. How do we know this? Well, let's continue reading. He says, your duties in this respect are no greater than those of our West Indian, Haitian, and eventually our Brazilian brethren. Whatever in this letter applies to our brethren in the United States applies in an equal degree to them. But I am not here to address them. He's talking to us. And so, again, he thinks that we have this equal share and a duty to preserve Africa. And on 256, Cromell is saying, but we in common with you are becoming awake to the conviction that as a race we have great work to do. Our own thoughtful men begin to feel the binding tie which joins them in every interest and feeling with the Negro race all over the globe. But let's go back to Garvey though, who Cromell inspired. He says, if the Negro were to live in this Western Hemisphere for another 500 years, he would still be outnumbered by other races who are prejudiced against him. He cannot resort to the government for protection, for government will be in the hands of the majority of the people who are prejudiced against him. Hence, for the Negro to depend on the ballot and his industrial progress alone will be hopeless, as it does not help him when he is lynched, burned, Jim Crowed, and segregated. The future of the Negro, therefore, outside of Africa, spells ruin and disaster. And he says, the only wise thing for us ambitious Negroes to do is to organize the world over and build up for the race an almighty nation of our own in Africa. And this race of ours that cannot get recognition and respect in the country where we were slaves, by using our own ability, power, and genius, would develop for ourselves in another country, in our habitat, a nation of our own, and be able to send back from that country, from that native habitat, to the country where we were once enslaved, representatives of our race that would get as much respect as any other ambassadors from any other race or nation. He explicitly says that the goal of this Back to Africa project is to lend protection to the members of our race scattered all over the world and to compel the respect of the nations and races of the earth. So remember the Pan-African conference I was telling y'all about? You know, the flyer? I actually have here the report of what was actually said. Let's check it out. So here it says, let the nations of the world respect the integrity and independence of the free Negro states of Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti, etc., and let the inhabitants of these states, the independent tribes of Africa, the Negroes of the West Indies and America, and the black subjects of all nations take courage, strive ceaselessly, and fight bravely, that they may prove to the world their incontestable right to be counted amongst the great brotherhood of mankind. That requires a specific move, though. You have to treat all these different peoples, Black Americans, Caribbeans, Africans on the continent, etc., as if they are all one coherent subject with one common family stock, one unified interest. And once you make that move, what happens? You necessarily subordinate specific local histories to the myth of a single racial destiny. You can't seriously say we're all one race with one destiny in Africa and not flatten the differences between a Black American whose ancestors fought and died to secure rights under the U.S. Constitution and, say, a French Caribbean subject or someone living under British colonial rule. The ideology forces that flatness. So when I say Pan-Africanism erases or sidelines distinct histories like Black American history, I ain't inventing no phantom. I'm following the logic of the project. Global racial unity plus a singular continental destiny necessarily requires local civic identities to take a back seat. Second point, Pan-Africanism justifies its own existence on the basis of global racial hostility. That is not me projecting. That is how the movement describes itself. The story goes like this. White powers rule the world. The default posture toward the weaker people is to subjugate, exploit, or even wipe them out. Therefore, Black people globally must unify for self-defense. The conferences, the manifestos, the speeches, again and again and again, the rationale is we must organize as one race because the world is organized against us as one race. In other words, the reason for the movement is an external threat. White supremacy, European colonialism, foreign powers, alien races, however you want to phrase it. We, the oppressed Black races versus the hostile white powers. The very justification for Pan-Africanism is reactive. It's not that we have a particular culture here or a particular law there, a civic order there, we shaped this or we did that. It's we are all globally united because the white world has globally oppressed us. So when I say Pan-Africanism constructs a Black identity in opposition to whiteness, I am not inventing a phantom. I'm only describing the explicit structure of the story the movement tells about itself. Here we see Marcus Garvey on page 11 saying, the attitude of the white race is to subjugate, to exploit, and if necessary, exterminate the weaker peoples whom they come in contact with. They subjugate first if the weaker peoples will stand for it, and then exploit, and if they will not stand for subjugation nor exploitation, the other resource is extermination. If you need an ever-present hostile white other to justify your unity and your purpose, then whiteness sits at the center of your metaphysical understanding. You're orbiting what you claim to resist. Third point, prominent Pan-Africanists do not just say America has problems. They say Black Americans relying on American institutions, constitutional laws, economic laws, and progress is basically a dead end. And this ain't even subtle. You get lines like, waiting for the race problem to work itself out in Western democracies is a fallacy. Depending on the ballot and industrial progress is hopeless in the face of lynching and prejudice. The Constitution and the founding documents of Western states were never intended for Black people. The government is essentially powerless or unwilling to protect us. Again, Garvey on page 35, he says, some of our leaders in the Negro race flatter themselves into believing that the problem of black and white in America will work itself out, and that all the Negro has to do is be humble, submissive, and obedient, and everything will work out well in the sweet and bye-bye. And as I showed earlier, you can see that he's saying that the future of the Negro, therefore, outside of America is hopeless. That's what he thought about us. Garvey, in his own words, that we suffer so much today under whatsoever flag we live is proof positive that constitutions and laws, when framed by the early advocates of human liberty, never included and were never intended for us as a people. It is only a question of sheer accident that we happen to be fellow citizens today with the descendants of those who, through their advocacy, descendants, laid the foundational human rights. This is page 36. He says, the mistake was made as far as the white people were concerned. There was a state of disorganization in the nation, and in that state, certain things happened by mere chance. In the chance, dozens of black men became senators and congressmen. This opened up to the eyes of the white man, or white nation, the possibility of the black man governing the white man in these United States. The possibility of the black man making laws to govern the white man. This possibility drove them almost to madness in suddenly rejecting the spirit of the Constitution and the Declaration of Lincoln that all men are created equal. Hence, a determination was arrived at that never again would it be possible for the races of slaves to govern the race of masters within the United States. Obviously wrong. So not only is he wrong, but he's extremely disrespectful to downplay the work of our ancestors as if they didn't have a hand in literally shaping the future in this country. From there, the prescription is clear. If the Western constitutional order is fundamentally alien or hopeless, the only wise action for ambitious black people is to stop investing in those institutions and instead build a separate, mighty black nation in Africa. That is not a side note. That is a core political proposal. Detach from the civic identity you have fought for where you actually live and reorient your hope toward a racial homeland project elsewhere. So when I say Pan-Africanism undermines or dismisses the real hard-won civic gains of black Americans within the United States, I am not attacking the phantom. I am taking the stated diagnostics and prescription seriously. If you tell me these institutions were never for you, you cannot rely on them, your only hope is racial succession to a continental project, then you have already written off the civic identity my ancestors carved into this country. Put all of this together. A project that unifies all Negroes of the world into one race with one destiny, a justification built on global white hostility and the need for self-defense, an explicit rejection of Western constitutional gains is sufficient for black life. You end up with exactly what I said. Local histories like black American history gets flattened into racial abstraction. The identity is structured around opposition to whiteness and foreign powers. The actual achievements black Americans fought for inside Western institutions are treated as inadequate, almost delusional. Is that a phantom? Or is that the movement by its own light? Now here's where I come in, and here's where the faceless YouTuber and I fundamentally diverge. I am not an abstract person of African descent. I am a black American. My people's story is not a generic saga of Africans under white supremacy. It is specific. Middle passage into this land, chattel slavery under this legal order, emancipation under this constitution, reconstruction, then betrayal, then struggle under this flag, participation in every American war, litigation, organizing, voting, and dying so that this state can no longer legally treat us as subhuman. We ain't get our freedom handed to us with an apology letter from the colonizer. We fought for all of this. Even Fanon, who is regularly quoted by the Pan-Africanist crowd, acknowledged the difference between people whose liberation was granted by the colonizer versus those who had to wrestle their status into being. Black Americans fall into the latter category. Why would I cheer for the downfall of the West when my lineage is tied to this specific work of reforming and restraining and partially redeeming this particular Western state? If the whole of who I am is not built on being a generic African, but built on black Americans whose ancestors forced this country to acknowledge their humanity, the destruction of the West is not liberation. It's civilizational suicide. You're not just burning down whiteness. You're burning down the political order in which Black Americans carved out protections, rights, and space to exist as full citizens. And this is why I call Pan-Africanism as a political theology a problem for Black Americans. It demands that I trade my concrete inheritance, our history, our law, our civic standing here, for a racial abstraction. It tells me that the institutions my ancestors forced open are fundamentally illegitimate and can never be enough. And it binds my identity to a perpetual war against external enemies instead of rooting it in an actual civilizational project my people helped shape. The faceless YouTuber wants to pretend that none of this is baked into the ideology. He wants to act as if I'm just inventing some straw man who hates Black American achievement and lives only to hate whiteness. No, I'm reading the movement's own aims to their logical conclusion. If you build an identity on global racial unity, permanent external hostility, and the rejection of Western constitutionalism, then you are going to erase distinctions between different Black peoples, make whiteness the structural antagonist you can never stop referencing, push Black Americans away from the very civic ground that we fought to stand on, and it's designed that way. So to the faceless YouTuber, you can call my critique phantom all you want, but I am not operating off of vibes. I'm actually operating off the stated goals, rhetoric, and prescriptions of the Pan-Africanist tradition itself. You don't get to treat all Black people as one interchangeable racial block, define that block primarily by global white hostility, tell Black Americans that their constitutional gains are hopeless illusions or whatever, and then act offended when someone points out that this ideology flattens our history and orbits whiteness. I am a Black American. This is my home. My people made their claim here in blood and law and in institutions, and I will not abandon that concrete inheritance for a racial abstraction built on resentment and escape fantasies. And if that offends you, argue with the premises, engage with the logic, deal with the sources. But stop pretending that I'm fighting a phantom, when the ghost you're defending is the metaphysical core of Pan-Africanism itself.
Just for now.